I'll never forget the way Nathan's face collapsed when he realized the dinner invitation wasn't a step toward forgiveness, but a stage for his final act. The terror washed over him in slow motion, his confident smirk disintegrating into a pale mask of dread. If there were an award for best performance by a husband who thought he got away with it, he would have swept every category without breaking a sweat. I still remember the chill of the hospital floor beneath my bare feet when I decided to leave earlier than planned. The doctors had finally given me the green light after 3 weeks of treatment for pneumonia that had nearly killed me. "Mrs. Carter, you're not fully recovered yet, but you can continue your recovery at home," Dr. Hayes had said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I was so eager to surprise Nathan, my husband of 8 years, that I didn't even call ahead. God, how I wished I had. The cab pulled up to our Victorian-style home in Charleston, the dream house we'd bought using part of my inheritance after my father passed away 2 years ago. I remember thinking how strangely quiet everything felt. Nathan's BMW was in the driveway, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. He often worked from home. What caught me off guard was my mother's Range Rover parked right behind it. Mom had been helping out since I got sick, supposedly checking on the house and sometimes bringing Nathan meals. She'd visited me in the hospital just yesterday without mentioning she'd stop by today, but I actually felt relieved at the thought of having them both there. It would make my surprise homecoming even better. I paid the driver and wheeled my small suitcase up the walkway, still feeling weak but energized by the idea of sleeping in my own bed that night. Using my key, I entered as quietly as possible, thinking maybe I could really surprise them. The house was eerily silent, except, was that laughter coming from upstairs? I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. That wasn't TV laughter. It was my mother's laugh, that distinctive cackle she let out when she was feeling flirtatious. I'd heard it countless times at social events when she'd had one too many glasses of wine. "No, this can't be real," I whispered to myself, setting my suitcase down. Maybe the medications were still messing with my head. I moved toward the staircase, gripping the banister tighter than usual, still weak from my illness. Each step felt like a mile as I climbed, my heart beginning to pound so hard that my recovering lungs burned. The master bedroom door was partially open, and before I even reached the top of the stairs, I heard it. My mother's voice, breathless and playful, saying words I would never be able to forget. "She doesn't ever have to know, Nate. What happens when Amelia's away stays between us, Nate," the nickname only I called him. I reached the doorway and pushed it open with trembling fingers. The sight before me looked like something ripped from a nightmare. My 54-year-old mother, Diane, was straddling my husband on our bed, her blouse unbuttoned, his hands gripping her waist. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me until I made a sound, not a scream or a shout, but a pathetic, wounded whimper that slipped out of my throat without permission. They both turned, their faces shifting instantly from pleasure to shock. Nathan practically threw my mother off him onto the mattress. "Amelia, oh my God, you're home," he stammered, frantically pulling the sheet over himself. "This isn't. I can explain." My mother clutched at her open blouse, her face a mask of shock, but without the slightest trace of shame, at least not enough of it. "Darling, you were supposed to be in the hospital until Friday," she said, as if my early release was somehow my fault, as if I was the one interrupting them. I couldn't breathe. The pneumonia that had nearly taken my life was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of this betrayal. My husband and my own mother, together in my bed while I was fighting for my life. "How long?" I managed to choke out, gripping the door frame to keep from collapsing. They exchanged a quick look that told me everything. "This wasn't the first time, Amelia. You're still recovering. Let's talk when you're stronger," my mother actually had the audacity to say now, fiddling with the buttons of her blouse. "Get out," I screamed, the force of it sending me into a coughing fit that doubled me over. "Both of you, get out." Nathan jumped up, pulling on his pants. "Babe, please let me explain. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, Nathan," I said suddenly, feeling an icy cold clarity replace the shock. "This was a choice. A disgusting choice you both made repeatedly while I was fighting to breathe in a hospital bed. My mother stepped toward me, reaching out as if to comfort me, as if she had any right. "Amelia, sweetie, you're overwrought. You need to sit down before you collapse." I backed away from her touch like it was poison. "Don't you dare pretend to care about my health now. How could you? My own mother?" A surge of grief and fury twisted inside me, every memory of childhood hugs and whispered bedtime stories turning to ash. My chest ached with each shallow breath, not just from pneumonia, but from the raw, searing pain of knowing the two people I trusted most had been lying to my face. I wanted to scream until the walls cracked, until they felt even a fraction of the devastation clawing me apart from the inside. The look that passed between them confirmed my worst suspicions. I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This had history. I turned and stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling in my weakened state. I could hear them both calling after me, making excuses, begging me to calm down and talk, but there was nothing to say, nothing that could undo what I'd seen or erase the betrayal slicing through me like glass. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a wave of dizziness crashed over me, and I sank onto the last step, my body betraying me just like they had. I heard them coming down behind me, both frantically dressing. "Amelia, please, you're still sick." "Let me drive you back to the hospital," Nathan pleaded, reaching for me. I looked up at him. This man I'd loved since college. This man who had held my hand through my father's funeral. This man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. And next to him stood my mother, the woman who taught me to be strong, to value myself, to never let anyone disrespect me. "Don't touch me," I whispered, too weak to shout anymore. "Either of you." In that moment, as I sat there trembling with fever and betrayal, something inside me hardened. I knew exactly what I was going to do. They thought I was weak. They thought they could take advantage of my illness, my trust. They had no idea what was coming. My father always told me, "Amelia, being born wealthy is luck, but staying wealthy is strategy." As I looked at the two people who had betrayed me most profoundly, I remembered his words and felt something like his strength pour into me. "I need to lie down," I said quietly, "and then we're going to talk about what happens next." Neither of them knew that when I said what happens next, I wasn't talking about reconciliation or even confrontation. I was talking about retribution. The next few days were a blur of tears, arguments, and pathetic excuses. Nathan moved into the guest room at my insistence, while my mother, God, I could barely even call her that anymore, returned to her condo across town. The story they crafted was so predictable it was almost insulting. It just happened. "Amelia," Nathan said, pacing our living room the day after I caught them. "I was lonely and worried about you, and your mother was here all the time. And one night we had too much wine and..." He trailed off, running his hands through his hair like he always did when he was lying. "And what, Nathan? You accidentally fell on top of my mother? For how long has this just happened?" My voice was hoarse from coughing and crying. He couldn't look me in the eye. "A few months. A few months." I did the math in my head. My pneumonia diagnosis had only been 3 weeks ago. This had started well before I got sick. It started at your father's memorial service. My mother confessed when she came over uninvited, bringing soup, as if chicken noodle could somehow fix what she'd shattered. We were both so devastated, Amelia. You were busy with the arrangements, and Nathan and I found comfort in talking about Richard. One thing led to another. My father's memorial, while I was organizing the service for my beloved dad, greeting mourners, making sure his favorite songs were played, my husband and my mother were what? Sneaking off to comfort each other. I threw the soup against the wall, watching it drip down the expensive wallpaper I'd chosen when we moved in. The crash gave me a brief, bitter satisfaction. My hands were shaking violently as I stood there, breathing in ragged gasps. The scent of chicken broth hung heavy in the air, nauseating and sour, mingling with the sharp sting of betrayal that burned deeper than any physical wound. I felt like I was drowning in a nightmare, each second stretching into an eternity of rage and heartbreak. "So you've been sleeping with my husband for almost 2 years?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Since Dad died?" She had the decency to look ashamed. Then, not continuously. "We tried to stop many times. It's just..." "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "I can't even look at you right now." Both of them kept coming back, though. Nathan, with flowers and empty promises that it would never happen again. My mother, with tears and reminders of everything she'd done for me, as if raising me gave her the right to sleep with my husband. They were so concerned with securing my forgiveness, so desperate to make themselves feel better, that neither of them noticed I was making phone calls when they weren't around. Neither questioned why I wanted my laptop, even though I was supposed to be resting. I spent a week pretending to consider their apologies, while secretly contacting my father's attorney, Robert Langley. Dad had always trusted Robert implicitly, and now I understood why. When I explained everything to him over a secure line, his response was measured but supportive. "Amelia, I'm deeply sorry for this betrayal. Your father would be outraged," he said, his voice grave. "What would you like to do?" That was the right question. Not "are you sure?" Not "maybe you should think about forgiveness." Just a straightforward acknowledgement that action was necessary. "I want to change my will and all my financial arrangements," I replied, "and I need to know exactly what my mother's financial situation is." Robert was silent for a moment. "Your mother's situation, may I ask why?" I took a deep breath. My father had left her well provided for, but I'd always wondered if there was more to it. She started living much more extravagantly after his death than she ever had when he was alive. Another pause. "Amelia, I think we should meet in person. There are some things about your parents' financial arrangements that, well, your father wanted you to know eventually." That conversation set everything in motion. While I pretended to be weighing things with Nathan and my mother, I was actually gathering information and making plans. Nathan would come home from work, bringing my favorite takeout or a new book, sitting on the edge of the bed with that hangdog expression. "I love you, Amelia. Only you." "It was just physical with your mother, meaningless," he'd say, as if that somehow made it better. I'd look at him with tears in my eyes, real tears, because despite everything, this betrayal was gutting me from the inside out, and I'd say, "I need more time, Nathan. This isn't something I can just get over." He'd nod understandingly, thinking my hesitation was part of the forgiveness process. He never once considered that I might be planning something else entirely. My mother was just as fooled. She'd call daily, leaving tearful voicemails. When I wouldn't answer, "Amelia, please. I know what I did was unforgivable, but you're all I have. We're family. Blood. Please, let me explain in person." After a week, I finally agreed to see her for tea. She arrived bearing an expensive peace offering. A Chanel scarf I'd admired months ago, and launched straight into a well-rehearsed speech about mistakes and forgiveness. I let her talk, watching her face closely. This woman who had taught me how to apply lipstick, who had held me when my first boyfriend shattered my heart, who had walked me down the aisle when my father was too ill to do it himself. This woman had betrayed me in the most fundamental way imaginable. And yet, even as I sat there, a small part of me whispered doubts. What if she saw through my mask? What if Nathan sensed the shift in my tone? At night, I lay awake, replaying every word we exchanged, terrified they would catch a crack in my facade before I was ready. My heart ached with a shameful longing for the days when Nathan's touch felt safe and my mother's voice felt like home. The war inside me threatened to unravel everything, but I forced myself to keep smiling, to keep lying. "Mom," I interrupted her monologue, using the word deliberately to see her reaction. She brightened instantly, hope lighting up her eyes at the familiar address. "I need to understand something. You and Dad were married for 30 years. Did you ever cheat on him?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked rapidly, setting her tea cup down with a faint clatter. "Of course not. Your father and I had a wonderful marriage. Then why? Of all the men in the world, why Nathan?" She looked down, fidgeting with her wedding ring, which she still wore 2 years after my father's death. "I don't know, Amelia. It wasn't planned. Nathan was there. He was attentive. He understood what I was going through, losing Richard." Her voice trailed off lamely. What she didn't say, what she couldn't admit, was something I'd already suspected. My mother had always been jealous of me, of my relationship with my father, of my inheritance, of my marriage to Nathan, who was successful on his own, but also gained so much from my family's wealth and connections. Little did my mother know that, as we sat there drinking Earl Grey, Robert Langley was uncovering evidence that would change everything. Evidence that would give me exactly what I needed to set my plan in motion. I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face and felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. "I need more time, Mom, but I think we can work through this eventually." The relief on her face was unmistakable, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Oh, Amelia, thank you. You won't regret giving us another chance." She was wrong about that. They would both regret it deeply. I just needed a little more time to set everything up perfectly. The meeting with Robert Langley changed everything. His office always reminded me of my father, the same leather-bound books, the scent of expensive cologne and paper, the quiet competence that made you feel safer just by being there. "Amelia, I've completed the investigation you requested," he said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. "And I'm afraid the results are troubling." I opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were bank statements, property transfers, and legal documents that told a story my father had hidden from me. "Your mother was having an affair during your father's illness," Robert said gently. "Not with Nathan, but with your father's business partner, Edward Lane." I felt the blood drain from my face. Edward had been like an uncle to me growing up. He'd even been a pallbearer at Dad's funeral. "There's more," Robert continued. "Your father discovered the affair about 6 months before he died. He changed his will to significantly reduce your mother's inheritance, placing much of it in a secondary trust that you would control when you turned 35. I was 33 now. However, Robert said, his voice hardening, the updated will mysteriously disappeared after your father's death. The version that was executed was an older one, which left your mother with direct control of nearly 40% of the estate. I've always had suspicions, but no proof. My hands tightened on the folder. And now, Robert said with grim satisfaction, we have evidence that your mother and Edward conspired to hide the updated will. There are text messages, Amelia, explicit ones, discussing how to make sure the new will never saw the light of day. I thought I couldn't feel more betrayed, but I was wrong. My mother hadn't just cheated with my husband. She'd cheated on my dying father and potentially stolen millions from my inheritance. A hot wave of sickness rolled through me, bile rising in my throat as my mind flooded with images of my father lying weak in bed, trusting the woman he loved most while she plotted behind his back. The thought of him spending his last days believing in her devotion while she orchestrated this betrayal made my heart clench so violently it hurt to breathe. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Robert leaned forward. "That depends on what you want, Amelia. We have enough evidence to challenge the will's execution, to potentially file criminal charges for fraud. But legal battles are messy, public, and can drag on for years." I sat back, thinking of my father, how he always preferred elegant solutions to brute force. "What would you suggest?" "A different approach," Robert said with a small smile. "One that gets you what you deserve without the mess of a court battle." Over the next hour, we outlined a plan that was both simple and devastating. First, I would change my own will, removing both Nathan and my mother as beneficiaries. Instead, I would leave my personal fortune, still substantial despite my mother's theft, to a foundation in my father's name. Second, using the evidence Robert had gathered, I would confront my mother privately with an ultimatum. Return control of the misappropriated assets or face public exposure and criminal charges. Third, and this part was particularly satisfying, I would work with my financial team to gradually extract Nathan from the business partnerships he'd formed through my family's connections, partnerships that were the source of most of his current wealth. "Are you sure about this, Amelia?" Robert asked as we finalized the details. "Once you start, there's no going back." I looked at the photos of my mother and Edward, the bank transfers, the evidence of their betrayal of my father when he was at his most vulnerable. "I'm sure," I said. "They thought I was weak because I was sick, because I was heartbroken. They've been underestimating me my entire life. It's time they learned who I really am." I left Robert's office with a renewed sense of purpose. That night, when Nathan came home, I suggested we try to have dinner together. A first step toward healing, I called it. He was pathetically grateful, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and wearing the shirt I'd always said brought out his eyes. We ate by candlelight, and I let him hold my hand across the table, watching him relax as he believed he was being forgiven. "I've been thinking," I said, tracing the rim of my wineglass, "about our future." His face brightened. "Me too, Amelia. I promise you, we can get past this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I smiled slightly. "That's what I'm counting on. But I need you to do something for me." "First?" "Anything," he said eagerly. "I want us to update our wills and financial documents. After coming so close to dying, it made me realize how unprepared we are for the worst." He blinked, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. "Our wills? Sure, if that would make you feel better. But you're fine now, right? The doctor said you've mostly recovered." "Mostly," I said, letting a hint of vulnerability creep into my voice. "But it scared me, Nathan, and with everything that's happened between us, I just want to know our affairs are in order. That we're taking care of each other, no matter what." He agreed readily, never realizing he was signing the first document of his own financial demise. The next day, I invited my mother for lunch. She seemed encouraged by our tea meeting and arrived with another peace offering, a photo album she'd put together of our happiest family memories. "I thought we could look at these together," she said hopefully. "Remember the good times?" I set the album aside. "Maybe later, Mom. First, I'd like to discuss something important with you, something about Dad." Her smile faltered. "What about your father?" "About his will, actually, and about Edward Lane." Her face went completely white. It was answer enough. "I know everything," I continued calmly. "About the affair, about the changed will, about how you made sure Dad's final wishes weren't honored." "Amelia, that's not—" "You don't understand," she stammered. "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "You betrayed Dad when he was dying. You stole what he wanted me to have. And then, not satisfied with just betraying him, you decided to betray me too by sleeping with my husband." Tears welled in her eyes, but I was long past being moved by them. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. I slid a document across the table. "You're going to sign this. It transfers control of the disputed assets back to me as Dad intended. You'll keep enough to live comfortably, but nothing more. And if I don't?" she challenged, a flash of the manipulative woman beneath the maternal facade. "Then Robert Langley files charges for fraud and theft. Then every friend you have, every social connection you've cultivated, learns what you did to your dying husband, and then to your daughter. Then you lose everything anyway, plus your freedom and your reputation." She stared at me for a long moment, seeing something in my face she'd never seen before, the steel beneath the softness, the utter determination. She knew I wasn't bluffing. With a shaking hand, she signed the document. As she did, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that justice was being served. My father had trusted me to carry his legacy, and now I would honor that trust. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it at exactly the right moment. 3 weeks later, I invited both Nathan and my mother to our home for dinner. They arrived separately, both clearly confused by the joint invitation, but hopeful it signaled forgiveness. Nathan had spent the past weeks believing our marriage was on the mend, unaware that I'd been systematically removing him from my financial affairs. My mother had been subdued since signing the documents, watching me warily, but clinging to the possibility of reconciliation. I'd prepared the dining room carefully, my father's favorite classical music playing softly, his portrait prominently displayed, candles lit on the table he'd gifted us for our 5th anniversary. I wanted his presence to fill the room for what was about to happen. "Thank you both for coming," I said, as we sat down to the meal I'd had catered. I wasn't about to cook for them myself. I thought it was time we all talked together. They exchanged nervous glances. My mother took a large sip of wine. "Amelia, this is a good sign, isn't it?" Nathan ventured. "That you're ready to talk things through with both of us?" I smiled thinly. "In a manner of speaking." The first course was served in uncomfortable silence. I waited until they'd both taken several bites before I spoke again. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, about betrayal, about consequences, about what my father would have wanted me to do in this situation." My mother set down her fork with a clatter. "Amelia, I thought we resolved nothing." I cut her off. "You signed a document returning what you stole. That's not resolution. That's just the beginning." Nathan looked between us, confused. Stole? What are you talking about? So I told him everything, about my mother's affair with Edward, about the changed will, about the fraud she'd committed. His eyes widened with each revelation. You didn't know? I asked him, watching his reaction carefully. Of course not, he exclaimed. Amelia, I swear I knew nothing about any of this. My mother was staring daggers at me. This is private family business. There was no need to tell him. Oh, I think my husband deserves to know exactly who he's been sleeping with, I replied coldly. A woman who cheated on her dying husband and then stole from her own daughter. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the sharp crack of their illusions shattering like glass in the candlelit room. My voice came out low, steady, each word a deliberate blade carving through their hopes of forgiveness. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the humiliation, to watch their faces crumble as I laid bare their secrets. Nathan had the decency to look ashamed. My mother just looked angry, the mask of contrition slipping completely away. Fine, she snapped. I made mistakes, terrible ones, but don't act so innocent, Amelia. You've always had everything handed to you. Your father's favor, his money, his business connections. Some of us had to fight for what we got. I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Fight? Is that what you call sleeping with Dad's best friend, and then my husband? That's not fighting, Mother. That's betraying. I turned to Nathan, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. And you? Did you think I wouldn't find out what you've been doing with Lexington Partners? His face paled. Lexington Partners was the venture capital firm he'd been introduced to through my family connections. He'd recently secured a major position there, or so he thought. What do you mean? He asked cautiously. I mean that Charles Lexington and I had a very interesting conversation last week about how you've been exaggerating your role in securing the West Haven deal, about how you've been taking credit for connections that came through my family. That's not true, he protested, but his eyes darted away, a tell he'd always had since I first met him. Charles and I have a great professional relationship. Had, I corrected. You had a great professional relationship before I showed him the evidence that you'd been inflating your contributions while diminishing mine in your reports. Before I reminded him who actually brought West Haven to the table. The color drained from his face. You didn't. I did. You're being removed from the Lexington team, effective immediately. The announcement goes out tomorrow. My mother actually smiled, seemingly pleased to see Nathan taken down a notch. Her satisfaction was short-lived. And you, I continued, turning to her, should check your social calendar. You might find it suddenly empty. She frowned. What are you talking about? I'm talking about how Sheila Anderson, Linda Marks, and the rest of your bridge club now know exactly what kind of friend you are. The kind who sleeps with her dying husband's best friend, then steals from her own daughter, then sleeps with her daughter's husband. You had no right, she gasped. I had every right, I countered. You destroyed our family. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? The dinner continued in tense silence, broken only by the occasional attempt at defense from one of them, quickly shut down by another revelation from me. I laid it all out, how Nathan's career was effectively over in our city, how my mother's social standing was irreparably damaged, how the financial arrangements they'd both depended on were now changed forever. Why are you doing this? Nathan finally asked, his voice breaking. If you hate us this much, why not just divorce me and cut your mother off? Why all this? He gestured at the elaborate dinner, the careful staging. I took a sip of my water, looking at them both over the rim of the glass. Because I wanted you to understand exactly what you've lost. I wanted you to see it all disappearing while sitting at the table my father gave us, looking at his portrait, hearing his favorite music. I set the glass down carefully. My father taught me that wealth isn't just about money. It's about connections, reputation, standing. You've both lost all of those things. Now, you can keep the house, Nathan. It's a small price to pay to be rid of you. And Mother, you'll have your condo and a modest income. You'll both have the essentials for survival, but nothing more. You can't do this, my mother whispered, but there was defeat in her voice. She knew I already had. The divorce papers are ready for your signature, I told Nathan. Your personal belongings have been packed. A car will take you to a hotel tonight. He stared at me. This man I had once loved with my whole heart, Amelia, please, we can work through this. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. Something twisted painfully in my chest, the last remnant of what I'd once felt for him. If you ever loved me at all, you'll sign the papers without contesting anything. You'll take what I'm offering and disappear from my life by the end of the evening. They both understood the full extent of what they'd lost. Nathan left with a suitcase and the promise to sign the divorce papers. My mother departed in tears, finally comprehending that our relationship would never recover. As I closed the door behind them, I felt no joy, no triumph. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, cold and precise, had been served. It's been 18 months since that dinner. 18 months of rebuilding myself from the ashes of betrayal. 18 months of learning who Amelia Carter truly is, without a cheating husband or a treacherous mother surrounding her. The divorce was finalized quickly. Nathan knew better than to fight it. He signed everything without argument, taking only what I offered. Last I heard, he'd moved to Chicago, trying to rebuild his career from scratch. Without my family's connections or financial support, he's struggling. Sometimes I see his LinkedIn updates, desperately trying to sound successful while taking positions far below his previous status. I feel nothing when I see them. Not satisfaction, not pity, just emptiness. My mother's situation is similarly diminished. She keeps her condo and has enough for basic needs, but her social circle has contracted to almost nothing. Those country club women she so desperately wanted to impress now barely acknowledge her existence. She sends cards on my birthday and Christmas, each one filled with pleas for reconciliation. I return them unopened. As for me, I've thrived in ways I never expected. The foundation I established in my father's name, the Richard Carter Foundation for Ethical Business Practices, has become my passion. We work with companies to establish transparency in their operations and governance. The irony isn't lost on me, using money that was nearly stolen from me to promote honesty and integrity in business. I sold the house in Charleston. Too many painful memories haunted its halls. Now I live in a sunlit apartment overlooking Central Park. It's smaller, but filled only with things and people I truly care about. I've become more selective about everything. My possessions, my business associates, my friends. Robert Langley still handles my legal affairs, but he's become a friend as well. Sometimes we meet for lunch and talk about my father. The real man, not the sanitized version my mother tried to create after his death. Through Robert, I've reconnected with parts of my father's life and legacy I never knew existed. Your father would be proud, Robert told me recently over coffee. Not just of how you handled the situation, but of who you've become because of it. I'm not sure if that's true. Part of me wonders if Dad would have preferred mercy to justice. But then I remember his face when he talked about principles, about standing up for what's right, even when it's painful. I have to believe he would understand why I did what I did. Last month, I received an email from Nathan. He's engaged again, to someone much younger, of course. He wanted to clear the air before starting his new life. I read his lengthy apology with detached interest, like reviewing a contract for a business I no longer own. His words seemed sincere enough, but they touched nothing in me. I replied with a simple, "I wish you well," and blocked his address. My mother is more persistent. She showed up at my apartment building unannounced last week, convincing the doorman to call up. I agreed to meet her in the lobby, neutral territory. "You look wonderful," she said, her eyes hungry for connection. She's aged dramatically in the past year and a half. The lines around her mouth deeper, her hair more gray than blonde now. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Diane?" The use of her first name made her flinch, but she pressed on. "I miss you, Amelia. You're my only child. This estrangement is killing me." For a moment, seeing her diminished like this, I felt a flicker of pity. But pity isn't forgiveness, and it isn't enough to rebuild what she destroyed. You should have thought of that before you betrayed Dad, before you betrayed me. "Everyone makes mistakes," she pleaded. "Even you, Amelia. Someday you might need forgiveness too." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. "You're right, everyone does make mistakes. But what you did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of calculated choices that prioritized your desires over the people who loved you." I turned to leave, then paused. "I don't hate you anymore. That's the best I can offer right now. It was true. The burning hatred had cooled, leaving behind a calm certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. I sleep well at night. I laugh often. I've even started dating again, cautiously, selectively, with my eyes wide open. Sometimes I look back at that day in the hospital when Dr. Hayes told me I could go home early. If I'd called ahead, if I'd stayed one more day, how different would my life be? I might still be married to a man who betrayed me at my most vulnerable. I might still be manipulated by a mother who saw me as competition rather than as a daughter. Instead, I'm standing on my own, stronger, wiser, and finally free from the web of lies they wove around me. Dear friend, sometimes life cracks us open in the most brutal ways, revealing truths we wish we could unsee. But remember this: what breaks you doesn't have to define you. It can forge you into someone stronger, someone who knows their worth beyond anyone's betrayal. As the Stoics remind us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I hope Amelia's journey reminds you that even in the darkest moments, you can choose to rise, to reclaim your life, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. You are stronger than you think, and you deserve a life where your worth can't be stolen. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us keep bringing you heartfelt, inspiring content. Thank you.